Another heuristic that people use to make judgments and decisions is what's called the representativeness heuristic. And this rule is that if it seems like X, then it must be X. Another heuristic that people use to make judgments and decisions is what's called the ignore how often X actually occurs. This is what's known as a base rate. And in general, what we're talking about is that we ignore the times or the actual statistical probability of something being true. So in the duck example, if it turns out there's only one duck in the whole world, then if we see something that looks and quacks like a duck, then probabilistically, it's still probably not a duck. But we might make that inference just because of how well it represents what we think of as a duck. Another example of this is given in the following example. Consider this statement. Tom W. is of high intelligence, although lacking in true creativity. He has a need for order and clarity, and for neat and tidy systems in which every detail finds its appropriate place. His writing is rather dull and mechanical, occasionally enlivened by somewhat corny puns and by flashes of imagination of the sci-fi type. He has a strong drive for competence. Now, if I asked you how likely you think it is that Tom W. is an engineering major at his university, what might you think is the likelihood of that being true? You're trying to judge how likely is it that Tom W. is an engineering student. You likely think that the probability is pretty high. This seems like an engineering student if you were to put all the pieces together. But what if I told you also that at his school, only 5% of all students are engineering majors, and 70% are English majors? Now I ask you to judge the likelihood that Tom W. is an engineering major versus an English major. You probably still think it seems really likely that Tom is an engineering student and not an English student, because the description is so clearly consistent with a schema you might have of engineering students and not consistent with an English student schema. But we know that the base rate means it's really unlikely that Tom is an engineering student. But representativeness heuristic says that people ignore that information and continue to judge on representativeness. Another example of this has become a very classic example. Linda is a 31-year-old single, outspoken, and very bright woman. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. How likely do you think it is that Linda is a bank teller versus that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? Which do you think is the more likely response here? Which seems most likely? Well, when you look at people's estimates and the actual figures they provide, people say there's a 15% chance that Linda is a bank teller and an 85% chance that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. However, this can't be the case. It can't be more likely that Linda is both a bank teller and active in the feminist movement than it is for Linda to just be a bank teller, or just to have that be the likelihood of that at all. So if you look at this Venn diagram, you can see how this plays out. You can see that there has to be some overlap between bank tellers and feminists, such that that whole circle for bank tellers has to be bigger than the cross-section of feminist bank tellers. Okay, so you can't judge it to be more likely that Linda is both a feminist and a bank teller than the likelihood of Linda being a bank teller. Can't be more likely. However, the description so closely matched a schema you might have of a feminist, so you over-rely on the representativeness of the information matching the judgment criterion, and you ignore the actual probability. So that's representativeness heuristic.